Okay, good afternoon everyone. We've just one more stop after me in soils before you go back to the yard, so I know it's been a long morning. Can I just welcome you here to this part of the farm walk where I'm talking about winter feeding. And my name's Conrad Ferris, so I'm one of the dairy scientists at Hillsborough. I'm just going to start off with the first board here, which is very much about preparing for winter feeding. And really just a fact for you, concentrates account for 60 to 70% of feed costs on Northern Ireland dairy farms. So if you can get concentrate feeding right over the winter, there's real opportunity to cut down on costs. But to get concentrate feeding right, probably the most important thing is to know what the analysis of your silage is. This board summarises the composition of first cuts and second cut silages that have been analysed within the Hillsborough Feeding Information System so far this year, or at least up until a couple of weeks ago. The good news is that on average, certainly the first cut analysis is well ahead of last year, or well ahead of the last few years. The average ME this year is about 11.1 compared to normally about 10.8. And more importantly, if you look at the figures in red, that's the range of compositions of silages on farms. And there really is a very large range. Obviously not all of these are dairy farms, but there certainly are farms out there with really good quality first cut silage. In fact, this farm has a silage with an ME content of 12.3 this year. So really excellent quality silages on some farms, and of course there are others that just for whatever reason haven't got the same quality. The key message here is, if you don't know what the quality of your silage is, you can't plan your winter feeding. If you're in the fortunate position to have a really excellent quality silage, as there is in this farm, there is opportunities to cut back on winter feed costs this winter. But unless you know the composition, you can't actually do that. So the key message from the first board is, if you haven't had your silage analysed yet, get it analysed. John Archer from the Hillsborough Feeding Information System is back in the yard. John has got the bags there. Talk to him about getting it analysed. I suppose just in finishing on this one, and it's probably something I didn't expect to be saying 3 weeks ago when we started to put the boards together, also consider, have you enough forage in the pit to get you through the winter? A lot of third cuts aren't harvested yet. A lot of people have cows starting to feed first and second cuts. So have a look, do your forage budget and see if you've got enough to get you through the winter. Okay, moving on really to some of the research we've been doing, and the first area is what is the optimum body condition score for cows at calving. This graph summarises the results of a study that we carried out on 10 farms, over 1,200 cows, when we were really monitoring what happened to cows' body condition score. And you can see here, I'll just pick a couple of lines. This is 8 weeks pre-calving when the cows were dried off, up till calving, which is 0, and then the first 32 weeks of lactation. The red line shows what we're calling the fat cows, or the fatter cows here. And you can see these cows that on average had a body condition score over 3, almost 3.25, lost a lot of body condition during the dry period and continued to lose that during early lactation. Compare that to the blue line, the other extreme, and these were the thin cows, cows with a body condition score of about 2.25. And these cows really didn't change much either during the dry period or during the lactation. So what's the impact of that? Well, firstly, for the fatter cows, these cows lost more body condition, as I've said. We didn't get a milk yield benefit, even though they were fatter to start off with, and these cows actually would have had lower intakes. On the thin cows, the blue line, they had an increased risk of being culled during the lactation. So somewhere in between here is probably what we're saying is the optimum, and really what I'd say is the target body condition score at drying off is probably around 2.75. Some will say, well, it should be up in 3. There's probably not a lot of evidence with high yielding cows to say you'll get any benefit of going up to 3. And there's even some research suggesting maybe less than 2.75, but 2.75 is a good target. That leads us to another question. If cows aren't at that body condition score when you're planning to dry them off, what do you do? How do you get cows to that? And indeed, is it possible to do that? The first issue I'd say is you look at them and you find out if the cow has a health problem. If she's got a low body condition score because she's lame or some other health issue, obviously you need to deal with that first. But what about the cows that are what I'm calling are nutritionally thin? And I suspect, and I know certainly at Hillsborough, cows that have been out at grass all summer, certainly to the end of July, they were flying, But over the last 6 weeks, the wet weather we've had, we've kept them out because of the experiments, and suddenly some of those cows have started to lose quite a bit of body condition. Cows that are nutritionally thin, what are the options to get body condition score onto them, if indeed it's possible? And really this board highlights a couple of studies that we've carried out just to really see, can we get body condition score onto these thin cows? The first study looked at the period from about 13 weeks pre-calving up until about 8 weeks pre-calving, this green bar here. And I'll talk about the first two treatments to start off with, the nutritional treatments. We just had a standard late lactation management to start off with. And then we put what I'd call a low protein, high starch concentrate into the diet, because there was some anecdotal evidence that that sort of concentrate helped thin cows gain body condition. You can see the results here really indicated that the low protein, high concentrate diet didn't do anything for body condition, didn't help us gain body condition. And in fact, for a reason we've never quite figured out, those cows had some long-term problems. The other treatment we looked at here was this, what I call an extended lactation, the green line. And certainly we found that if you have dried cows off 13 weeks pre-calving, we were able to get those cows to gain almost half a unit of body condition. But look what happened to those cows almost immediately after calving. Even though we got the condition onto them, they lost it almost immediately. So we didn't get any long-term benefits with that. The second approach we looked at in this study, again out on farms, was really seeing if we fed concentrates to cows during the dry period, could we get them to gain body condition. So we had no concentrates, we had concentrates for the final 3 weeks, and then concentrates for the entire dry period. And I think you can see here the three lines are really more or less all on top of each other. We didn't get any benefit with concentrate feeding here. So probably in summary from this, these two studies, the message I'd say is it is actually difficult to get high yielding cows to gain body condition, either in late lactation or during the dry period, which probably brings you to the conclusion here, you really need to be trying to manage those cows well before that. Probably too late for a lot of cows this autumn as cows are being dried off now, but cows that calving in the spring, probably still some opportunities to do that. I think one of the things, and there's a real research issue that we have, is with the high yielding cow, the high genetic merit Holstein cow, these cows are probably genetically predisposed to lose a certain amount of body condition and get to a certain body condition. And almost no matter what we do, they're going to end up there. And that's an area that we probably need to do more research to understand that, and probably even to question, well, how much can we really do, or do we just accept that's the cow? Moving on then to sort of once the cow is calved down, how do we actually feed concentrates to that cow? And this is an area we've carried out a number of studies looking at over the last number of years. Mark Little, who's in the audience, not ask you to speak, Mark, but Mark did his PhD in this whole area. And this was just one of the studies. Study comparing a feed to yield system where we fed a basal diet, silage plus concentrates that could probably support 22 to 24 litres of milk. And we then topped up individual cows on a feed to yield basis. And we compared that with a very simple flat rate system, which was a complete diet. The amount of concentrates that the cows were offered was the same with the two systems, but just the lines here were different, showing we were putting in concentrates at different stages. But the key finding from this study was really the two very different systems had no impact on cow performance. And I think that's the key message from this board. Very different systems of concentrate allocation can give you very similar levels of performance if they're managed properly. And I think this farm is a classic example of that. The farm operates a really simple system, blocks of silage put alongside the feed barrier, and then cows are fed using a manual feed to yield system in parlour. No out of parlour feeding, no wagons, and milk production last year was 8,700 litres with over 3,500 litres from forage. Really simple system on this farm, but operated properly, and that really highlights that really simple systems can be effective, but you just need to manage those systems properly. I think really just to finish off, really one more board on concentrate feeding, and this one is really optimum feed rates. And I've said here within this system, within the feed to yield system, we had a basal diet, and as again is what many of you will do. You have a basal diet that supports maintenance plus a certain amount of milk, depending on the silage quality. and then you'll top up individual cows on a feed to yield system, and the feed rate of 0.45 kilos of concentrate per litre of milk is what's normally used. So this study at Hillsborough was really looking to see what happens if we reduced it to 0.35 or what happens if we increased it to 0.55. So really, just to summarise the key findings there, the difference between 0.35 and 0.45 as a feed rate, as you can see here, very little difference. Now I would emphasise it was a study that had really good quality silage, but with that good quality silage we didn't find a difference between those two feed rates. And I think that's probably a challenge for anyone here today who has got really good quality silage on your farm. If you're operating that feed to yield system, this is probably the year where you could consider, well, can I drop that to 0.4? Can I even go down to 0.35? Obviously, if you're doing it, you need to keep an eye on the tank, you need to keep an eye on body condition score. But our research with a good quality silage would say there's very little difference in performance between that. You'll probably save on about a kilo of concentrates per cow, and you can see here fat plus protein yield didn't differ. But what about the 0.55 kilogram feed rate? Obviously a higher level, not too many people operating up there, but certainly some people at 0.5. One of the big issues here, if you look what happened to milk fat in this treatment, was milk fat collapsed. That was the average, so there are a lot of cows way below that in terms of milk fat, 3.8% milk fat. And yet, what happened in this study, fat collapsed, we got more volume of milk, we were in a feed to yield system, so we put in more concentrates as you do in a feed to yield system. So we ended up putting more and more concentrates in here, and we drove down fat further. And the bottom line was we didn't get any benefits in terms of fat plus protein yield. So whatever system you're on, if you're maybe operating on that sort of higher level, keep an eye on the fat levels, because it's an area we think is really important. Our research would suggest that certainly once you get above sort of 12 to 14 kilos, fat can really fall off very dramatically. And whenever milk price is low, and this winter fortunately we're going to be up around 30, hopefully higher, but when milk price is below about 26, 27 pence, those cows with the real drop in milk fat content can actually end up being a lot less profitable than cows getting an awful lot less concentrates. It's an area we want to take out onto farms next year, not to actually do anything on the farms, but simply to monitor what goes on 30 farms operating feed to yield systems. That's something we will hopefully be recruiting farmers to take part in come next spring. So keep an eye in the press, and really what we'll be just doing is detailed monitoring of what's going on your farm if you operate a feed to yield system. The final bit of the board here is probably more for those that are operating non-feed to yield systems, sort of flat rate type systems. And I think the key thing here is really just to once again highlight the benefit of really good quality silage. Just this example shows we've got 3 silage qualities: a low, which I'm saying is 10.1, a medium, which is 11.2, which is pretty much the average of what we have in farms this year, and then a really high quality silage, which some of you probably are fortunate enough to have. And let's look at, we're assuming a target milk yield here of 30 litres. Well, if you've got the low quality silage, you probably need to feed about 12 kilos of concentrates to get there. If you have the high quality silage, you can cut that down to probably less than 8 kilos. So if you know the silage quality, there's probably real opportunities for some people to save on feed costs this year. The last point here is really don't overdo it, especially if you have the high quality silage. Our analysis would show that the sort of break-even level of feeding with really high quality silage is probably around 12 kilos of concentrates with a milk price around 29 or 30 pence per litre. So if you've got that silage, be careful that you don't overfeed it this year, or overfeed concentrates with it this year. That's pretty much me finished. I think I'll just go back to the very first board and really just re-emphasise that fact. We're at the start of the winter. Planning feeding this winter is all about, the starting point is knowing what's in your pit, knowing what the composition of that is. And if you haven't got that done yet this year, then I would suggest talk to John Archer back in the yard and get a sample of silage into the Hillsborough Feeding Information System. Okay, that's me finished. So if there are any questions for the next couple of minutes, I'm happy to try to deal with those.
With the milk price at 30p or thereabouts, what's the advice on feeding meal? You know, should they not be pushing it up? Because the ratio of absolute.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Stephen. If you're operating a feed-to-yield system, that's what you will be doing. You will be pushing it on. The risk with that is the collapse in milk fat. And the reason it's an area we're so interested in is I know a lot of farmers milk record, and I know what happens to information from the milk recording. Whenever it comes in the post, it lies in the file cabinet, it doesn't get looked at. And when you get your milk analysis back just in the bulk tank, you really just look at the bulk tank analysis. But if you actually would take out your milk records and look at some of those highest yielding cows, the cows that you're really pushing on, and you think they're the cows that are probably making you the most profit in your herd, and see what actually is happening in the butterfat of those cows. Certainly whenever we have analysed the data from Hillsborough, we have found that certainly when milk price is low, those cows are making less of a margin than a cow probably getting 50% less concentrates. When milk price is high, and even with concentrate costs are sort of relatively good, once you start really pushing on those cows and margins, if your fat is falling off, those cows quite often may not be producing any more money than cows getting less meal. So that's really what this project is about. We have found it at Hillsborough that those cows probably aren't making more money, and you're really pushing them hard metabolically. You're really pushing yields out of them, putting a lot of meal into them, and possibly not making you any more money. And that's why we want to go out onto 30 farms next year and collect that data and really analyse that. But you're right in saying, yes, these sort of levels are just based on milk price at 29 pence. Certainly you can push it on, but there is a break-even level beyond which you're not getting benefits from that. And it's trying to make sure that you don't go beyond that.
Conrad, if you reduce feed levels with a high quality silage, how much extra silage would you need in your clamp?
It probably depends a bit, Drew, on whether you're on a feed to yield system or you're on a sort of flat rate system. But certainly, as you reduce concentrate levels, with the medium quality silage.
Yes, if you've good quality silage in your pit, want to reduce concentrate levels, you're obviously going to need more silage.
Yeah, well.
How did you do your sums?
Okay, well,
much more over the winter, really?
There's a figure there will sort of give you some idea. And here we were sort of moving from 10 up to sort of 13 kilos of concentrates. I was on a dry matter basis, and you can see that our silage intakes were sort of falling off by our silage intakes were falling down. So obviously it goes the opposite way as well. Reduce your concentrates and your silage demand goes up. Once you get up to the very high levels, that's whenever, you move from very high levels, that's whenever you see the biggest, because it's not a straight line. It's very steep to start off with and then flattens off at lower concentrate levels. So, yeah, it's something, especially as a lot of third cuts aren't in, a lot of people struggling, pits open already. Yeah, that's what I said at the start. Feed budgeting is going to be really important for some farms this year. Not something we probably thought was going to be an issue 5 weeks ago. Because everything looked as if it was going so well. But I think for a lot of farms, probably more in the west, maybe where you are, Drew, but not just in the west, it is going to be an issue.